Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Community-Powered Risk Management, Tools for Small Businesses. Today's featured speaker is James Tarala. James is the author of LDR 419, Performing a Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, and LDR 519, Cybersecurity Risk Management and Compliance. If during the webcast you have any questions for James, feel free to enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording will be available for viewing in the next 48 hours, all of which can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to James.
All right, well, thank you so much for that. First of all, just appreciate everybody being here today. My name is James Tarala. I'm one of the SANS senior faculty members. I've been here for, goodness, 22 years now, maybe at SANS. Been here for a little bit. I've had a chance over the years to write a lot of coursework for SANS in the audit, the risk, the CIS control space, and other areas as well over all that time. And where a lot of my research has been taking place here in recent years has been over at the Cybersecurity Risk Foundation, where we've been trying to put out a fair number of resources geared at organizations who are working towards doing governance, doing risk management, doing compliance and such. And so want to share some of those resources and some of the tools that we've released today as part of that. Professionally, I work for an organization called Cyverity. And so the things that we're talking about here today in the webcast, these are things that we deal with our clients on a day-to-day basis. And so we want to be able to maybe reflect some of those back for you, maybe share some resources. What I want to do today, though, is talk about some of the tooling that's available for small businesses. You know, it's one of those things where at SANS, it seems like the vast majority of the presentations that we give are really targeted towards larger enterprises, right? Organizations that have resources, that have time on their hands, that have the ability and staffing maybe to handle some of these issues. And more, we're being confronted with the question of, well, how do we actually help small businesses do some of these very similar things? And so that's really the focus I want to talk about today. There's going to be some tips and tricks today. As many of you have maybe heard some of my previous webcasts, this is going to take a little bit of a fireside chat kind of tone. What we want to be able to do is there's a lot of things we've learned working with clients over the years that we want to be able to pass on to you. And we're hoping that some of the resources, some of the ideas, some of the guidance that we pass on in today's webcast is something that you can hopefully take back and use in your organization, or maybe even provide to other small businesses. In fact, the more I researched for this particular topic, the more I thought I'd really like to give away some of these webcasts, and maybe this is even just one of a few that we do, but that are specifically related to resources that small businesses could consume. So I'm going to give this presentation from two different angles. One is, if you're a cybersecurity professional and you're working with smaller businesses, what are some of the things you need to keep in mind? And so let's talk about that. Frankly, a lot of you probably are in that space. And if you're watching this webcast, maybe even after the fact, there's a good chance you probably are a cybersecurity professional. But having said that, if you're a small business owner, if you're somebody who's not a cybersecurity professional, I feel like we need to have resources available for you too. And so I hope the information that we present today is something that could be consumed, whether you're in cybersecurity or not, but we could give small businesses hope, we could give them resources, and maybe make it a little bit easier for them to be successful, because it can be confusing for folks who are in that space. For the sake of bandwidth and for the sake of the presentation, I'm going to turn off video just for a bit here so we can focus on the slides and the content. But we'll take some time to go through some Q&A and such as we go through this as well. The other thing I'd say too is I will keep an eye on the Q&A section. If you guys do have questions as we go through the presentation, I may not get to your question right away, but I will try to leave some time at the end to answer all the questions. And if we don't get a chance to get to your question, I apologize in advance. Just reach out to me after the fact, and we'll do our best to get those questions answered for you. So I mean, the first thing I always like to think about when we have these talks is I like to think about what is the thing that we're actually trying to accomplish? Like, what's the issue here, right? Why are all of us willing to take time out of our day to attend a webcast or give a webcast and learn some of this information? What's the issue that we're addressing? And to me, when it comes to small businesses, I think there's a couple issues that are really sort of driving this conversation. One, of course, is resourcing, right? You can't deny resourcing for small businesses. I mean, I can't tell you how many small businesses that we observe that frankly that they don't have people in place. They don't have money dedicated towards cybersecurity. They may barely have money dedicated to technologies. So I mean that just that resourcing, that personnel capital issue, the financial capital issue, these are real issues for small businesses, and especially when there's times of economic uncertainty and people aren't really sure really what the future holds for them. People are going to be careful with the pennies that they have. So, certainly small businesses are going to have a lot of emphasis on that because often, the information, the money that they're spending on cybersecurity resources could very well have gone towards their kids, right, or their family's future, or something maybe that personal. So, certainly that's an issue of concern. Uh, Also, I would say as well that there's also a lot of confusion around this area of cybersecurity defenses. Forget enterprises for just a minute. I mean, certainly enterprises have all kinds of confusion, but if you're a small business owner and you go out there and you say, okay, I've got $1,000 to spend this year, I've got $10,000 to spend this year, or whatever it happens to be, then the thing that we end up seeing is if you go out and Google, okay, hey, I've got this much money to spend as a small business, what should I do? There's a lot of disagreement and there's a lot of shiny baubles. Like if you do this here in 2025, maybe you get a response back that says, hey, you should do AI cybersecurity, or maybe you should do some other thing that may or may not actually be all that important for the big picture of your business. And so I think these are two sort of core issues that we come back to. One is there's a lack of resources, but that lack of resources is pronounced for small businesses. So I think we've got to address that issue. And I think there's just the confusion around what to do with that. Even if I have the dollars to spend, I mean, that's a whole different conversation that I think we need to probably address. So anyways, these are going to drive that conversation. And I would go on even further to say, all right, I want to understand from a problem statement standpoint, what are the things that we're trying to address here if we're trying to talk to small businesses? We talked about the resourcing issue, and I'll maybe clarify that one thing too. An organization might have resources, but there's a good chance that they don't have dedicated cybersecurity resources. And what I mean by that is maybe there's a person that they use to fix computers. But just because you can fix a computer and connect a printer doesn't necessarily mean you can provide strategy when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think these are two different things. We'll have to talk about that. I think, like I said earlier, and sort of what I mentioned, really for any size business, is that anytime we have this guidance that's out there on what cybersecurity best practices are, it's just frankly confusing. I know in some of the research that I've done, I've been doing some cataloging of some of the different standards that are out there, and I'm up to maybe parsing out 90 or so different standards in some of the research that I've worked on, and I'll tell you, you look at these different guides, and it's funny. You compare and contrast these different cybersecurity standards that are out there, and this guidance that's being given to people, and it is so vastly different, again, as you compare guide to guide. So again, how is a small business professional supposed to parse all this and figure all this out? I mean, this is a whole different conversation. The other part of that too is depending on which expert you decide to engage, right, or what webcast you decide to listen to, or what white paper you choose to download, you might get very, very different guidance. Or as Tony Sager used to always say, he would say, in cyber, we tend to agree on like 80% of the defenses we should have in place, but we'll fight to the death on the remaining 20%. And that's a pretty true statement. I think Tony's always been really accurate when it came to that. So again, just because you talk to one person doesn't mean or that you're going to get the same answers you talk to somebody else. And so again, how do we have consistency in knowing what is it that's actually something we should be doing? As we go through the presentation, though, I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. And so you take it or leave it, take it for what it's worth, but I'll give you my feelings and I'll give you some very specific action items that hopefully you can take advantage of as you go through the talk. The other thing I guess I'd call out specifically too is that attackers don't discriminate. And if we look at big businesses, we look at smaller businesses, I feel like what you're going to find is that really doesn't matter how big you are. If you have an IP address, if you're on the internet, if you receive email, if you visit websites, you're potentially a target. It doesn't mean that you're going to be targeted by a nation state per se, but it doesn't mean that you're not. I have seen large enterprises be targeted by nation states. I've seen small businesses targeted by nation states and everything in between. And I've seen large enterprises never targeted and small businesses never targeted. So I don't think size of company really discriminates and says, hey, this is how you're going to be likely to be attacked. I think we're all going to be attacked. It's just a matter of what's our capability of defending ourselves, and do we have appropriate safeguards in place to handle those things as they come up. So the question that I think we maybe have to start with then is, why should a small business care about cybersecurity? What's the big deal? And frankly, is this one of those things that's a luxury? Is this something that maybe is nice to have but not necessary? And I think this is realistic. Again, if you put me in the position of a small business owner and you say you have very, very limited funds to spend, and you can spend those funds on additional inventory, on tooling to help your line of business, on marketing capability, on a salesperson, on cybersecurity, where do you invest those funds? And there's a lot of times where operational concerns, and by operational, I mean technology, human resources, these accounting, right? These kinds of business operations, a lot of times, frankly, they may not be the priority. And so, this is something that even of itself, way before we even talk about cybersecurity, we have to say, is a smaller business capable of investing in operations for efficiency's sake? So at the end of the day, we know though that a small business, you really can't be a business, period. There's very rare, and it happens, I understand, but very rare is it that a business doesn't use technology to support a business operations. That's just the way it normally works now. And don't get me wrong, I do have some folks I've run into where they really are very limited in their use of technology. And that's fine, right? Some people still do paper invoicing. It happens. I run into those people sometimes. But the vast majority are using technology in some way. And so if you have a disruption to technology, and if you have disruption to technology systems that might be in place for an organization, then that disruption can impact the business, again, regardless of size. So if you need, let's say, emails to process orders, and that email goes down, well, I don't care if you're a 50-person company or a 50,000-person company, that's going to disrupt your operations. So we're becoming more and more reliant on technology to be more efficient, but then in that process, we've become dependent, which isn't bad. It's just what it is. But then we need to realize then that we need to be able to use that to be successful. So that all being said, then we also have to be able, customers, let's say, go back to the other side of it then, not only do we need technology to support the mission, but we also have to be able to trust our vendor, or customers have to be able to trust their vendors to protect their data. And there's this expectation that if I'm a business and a customer gives me their information, private or otherwise, that they're expecting that I'm going to protect that information and they're not going to regret giving me that information. And so if I, as a business owner, let's just say small business owner here specifically, if I lose trust, if my customers lose trust in me because I've done something like, say, not protect their data, then that's going to hurt the organization as well. And at the end of the day, if we just sort of thinking of this, I can give a few more examples, but ultimately the goal of cybersecurity in any organization is to support the organization's technology so that that technology can enable the organization's mission. And that's why we do what we do. So if cybersecurity goals are not achieved, then that hampers our ability to be successful utilizing our technology platforms, which has the potential to disrupt the business and its mission. And that's really what it comes down to for any organization. Long story short, we don't do these things. There's a potential that we can't do the things we need to do to be successful. And that's why, again, regardless of size, this becomes an issue. So the first thing I'm going to say is that before you get into deciding, what version of EDR you want to buy, right? Well, we'll get to that kind of thing, right? But you need to develop a philosophy for how you're going to address cybersecurity in the organization. And what I mean is at a very, very high level. But before we even start selecting defenses, as I started to write this presentation, of course, it's always, as a technologist, it's always tempting to talk details and get in the weeds about, what are the good things we should be doing, the safeguards, the technologies we should put in place to make sure that we're successful as an organization. But the more I started thinking about this, the more I realized, we should probably stop and think philosophically first. Why are we doing all this? Because maybe as a small business, there are things we can not do, or maybe we can avoid certain things and still be successful. So a couple things that sort of came to mind that I think I would do if I was a small business owner, if I was someone responsible for cybersecurity for a small business. First of all, what I'd probably say is cybersecurity and technology should not be our focus. So neither one of these is the reason we exist. Now, granted, maybe you are a tech company or something like that, right? Or you're a startup or something and creating an app or who knows. But for the most part, most small businesses don't exist to support operational elements, whether that's technology, cybersecurity, HR, accounting, doesn't matter. So that's really not our core focus. We want to be able to strive for an appropriate level of cybersecurity. And you're always going to hear this. You're always going to hear business owners say, I don't need the gold standard. I need what I need to be successful, but just what I need. I need an appropriate level of defense. Where's that bar where if I hit that bar, I'm at least good enough and I can always get better, but where's at least that minimum standard of care that I should have in place? We also want to make sure that we're only spending what's necessary to support the mission. I'm not saying you shouldn't be secure. I think security is amazing. I absolutely think cybersecurity should be a goal, but there does come a cap. And again, small businesses are not going to have the resources that a larger enterprise is going to have. And there are going to be safeguards likely that an enterprise can implement that a small business can't. And we just need to recognize that and be okay with that. And frankly, said in a risk management context, I think we have to accept the fact that if you're a small business, in a million ways, you're going to accept more risk than, frankly, a larger enterprise would. And it's not just a cybersecurity conversation. There's lots of examples of risky behavior that smaller businesses will likely engage in that a larger enterprise wouldn't. And that's normal. And that's how this generally works. But I also don't think fear should be our primary motivator for action. And I think a lot of times what cybersecurity people will do is go to these small business owners and say, listen, you need to get your act together because if you don't, the sky is going to fall. And you know what? Maybe the sky does fall, but maybe it doesn't. And maybe the owner of an organization knows, listen, that's a reality, right? That's the nature of being a small business owner when it comes to some of these things. I'm also going to argue that organizations need trusted advisors whenever they're not an expert in a particular field. And cybersecurity to me is no exception to that. But I think sometimes we ignore that fact. And so we'll talk about that here a little bit in the presentation as well. And I'm also going to argue that data should not be directly stored or processed unless it's absolutely necessary. And we'll talk about what that means. We'll get into some details. But what I'm going to argue is we not only need to have an approach on what defenses we should put into place, but a philosophy of how we actually decide what kinds of data we're going to actually utilize in the organization. So to implement this, what would I do? So again, if I were to go to somebody who's a friend, who owns a small business, and I was trying to give them advice, what would I be talking to them about? Well, first of all, I would probably say, carefully select your cybersecurity advisors. Think carefully about who's going to help you. You're probably not going to do this on your own. So who's going to help you do this? Secondly, I'd establish a firm foundation of program management of governance. Governance for small business is going to look very different than governance for large enterprise. And that's fine, we accept that. But I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on that front in a minute. We also want to choose a defensible architecture for our information technology. Before we choose a single safeguard, let's architect this thing in a way that makes it easy to defend. If we architect this thing and it's hard to defend, it's going to cost us more time, resources, energy to defend it. And we don't have that kind of time, resource, energy. We've got to be able to streamline this process. So how would we go about streamlining that? So let's talk about that. Let's also talk about what safeguards would be appropriate in this context. I'll give you some specific advice here in just a minute. And then I do think a process of regular validation is useful. Okay, are we doing the things we think we should do so that we can be successful, so we can achieve our mission? All right, so let's work through this. Now, one of the steps I think I would do is I would say start by carefully choosing your advisors. We all know resources are limited. We also know that most often small businesses don't have the ability to have a dedicated attorney on staff, a dedicated CPA on staff, etc. Why would that be any different for cybersecurity professionals? So if we know that we can't have a dedicated, let's say, attorney, or we can't have a team of dedicated attorneys on staff, well, why would we expect to have a team of cybersecurity professionals? It's probably just not going to happen. And that's fine. And so what we're going to do to keep costs, sort of limited and under control, we'll often then contract with those dedicated professionals. And we're going to have experts who can be there to support us if we have a need. So, for example, and I actually am a small business owner myself. So I have people that work with me on my team. One of those people is a bookkeeper, and that bookkeeper helps me to make sure that our accounting is all the way that it should be. Now, that bookkeeper interfaces with an outside CPA firm that I use to watch over that process for me. I can't afford to have a CPA on staff, but I can contract with a CPA to have them oversee the process. I don't have attorneys on staff to have specific areas of business law, contracts, intellectual property. I don't have those people on staff full-time working for me, but I've contracted to those people. And the same should be true for cybersecurity professionals. If you need somebody who's going to do technology or cybersecurity, you're going to need probably help to do that. The problem I see, though, is a lot of organizations will have hobbyists, they'll call them, create a technology strategy or make sure their printers work, but there's consequences to that. If you're ad hoc doing things that you find on the internet and just doing enough to make something work, there's a possibility that things end up breaking longer term for you. And the thing I guess I'd maybe say it in a different way is neighbors, brother-in-laws, right? These are probably very kind, good humans who have your best interest at heart. But the thing is, if they're not an expert in this space, do you really want them setting your strategy for cybersecurity? And so, whether that's cybersecurity, whether that's just technology in general, you need to find a professional, someone who's going to help you make these decisions. Now, do they need to be on site with you every week? No, for goodness sake, I hope not. But once in a while, you want to work with them to help set that strategy. And I'll say it a different way. A computer repair person in a strip mall does not equal a cybersecurity expert. Now, does that mean you might not get lucky once in a while? No, I bet there's some brilliant people who work in these computer repair shops in strip malls. But if that's the person you're going to, somebody at Best Buy or some other similar company, right, so doing sort of just break fix kind of work, they're probably not proactively looking for your organization's strategy for technology or security in general. There are some organizations that do this. It's a generic term. You've probably heard the term managed service provider or managed security service provider, MSP or MSSP, who really this is what they do. And there's lots of examples of these companies around the country. And I'm sure you can Google them and find some people in your area and things like that who do that. But often what they're going to do is they'll probably charge a monthly fee to a small business. And as a part of that, they'll let that small business utilize their software licensing, their software suites to help the small business achieve their cybersecurity goals. So in other words, instead of the small business trying to figure out, well, what vulnerability scanner should I use? Or what EDR agent should I use? Or what backup tool should I use? They just outsource all that to the MSP and let them handle it. And is that an expense? Sure. But is that a whole lot cheaper than trying to have an expert in some cases? In some cases, it is. So again, are they going to probably defend you in a cookie cutter approach? Maybe. A good chance it probably happens that way. But it's still better than probably what you could do on your own. Often you're going to hear this tool, this name, remote monitoring and management, RMM. Is often the tooling that these MSPs are going to use to help facilitate this process. And it's probably something that you're going to see organizations talk about. You'll hear companies like Ninja or Splashtop or Kaseya and others that are sort of in that space. And again, there's a lot of them that are out there. But again, oftentimes these MSPs will sort of do that to sort of scale the ability to outsource, again, your technology and cybersecurity management to somebody so you don't have to do it yourself. So probably something you're going to keep on your radar if you don't have that already. Now, that being said, as you're thinking about then specific strategies for going ahead and thinking about how you're going to architect your environment, one of the things that I would have you consider way before we even talk about the individual safeguards you're going to put into place is I would encourage anybody who's a friend of mine or asking me for guidance, I would say, look into cloud native technologies. And I understand that a lot of organizations don't feel comfortable moving their data, moving their client or their personal information to somebody else. They say, well, how can I trust that person? And the answer is you might not be able to. But frankly, you probably can't trust yourself either. And I think the days are gone where small businesses really can effectively or efficiently or cost effectively take responsibility for their own technology systems. I think we're just past that point. And the reality is these cloud platforms are out there and they've made it easier and definitely more cost effective for smaller organizations to consume technology at a smaller scale. And I think this is something we leave out sometimes. I think a lot of times when we're having these conversations about cloud, we think about scalability, but we think about being able to scale up. But the reality is cloud technologies also enable smaller businesses to take advantage of tools that they may have never had access to on their own. And I'm going to argue that cloud native technologies actually enable smaller businesses to scale these technologies down to fit their needs. So again, something you might want to think about. Again, you might be nervous and maybe you don't want to have a cloud technology in place, but what choice do small businesses have if they want to be able to achieve these goals and have those efficiencies? So said a different way, unless you've got a very specific need, I don't know that a small business should have their own servers or software or things that they're specifically supporting. In fact, let me just be really specific. If I had a friend asking me as a small business owner, should I have on-site servers? Should I have on-prem identity stores? Should I have infrastructure as a service? Should I have, Azure or AWS as a CSP? Should I have desktop software even installed on every workstation? My general answer is going to be no. And maybe this is outside the realm of cybersecurity, but I think to me, we have to lay a solid foundation if we're going to be successful with our cybersecurity goals. And I think this is something we need to seriously consider. If you're a small business and you recognize that you have these goals you want to achieve, this list that I have here, these may be things you need to readily eliminate from your overall stack. So I'm going to argue that the adoption of software as a service or SaaS really probably should be a priority unless there are no other alternatives. Now, don't get me wrong. Maybe you're a specific manufacturing shop and you've got tooling and things that you use on-prem, CAD software, whatever it might be, that's unique and specific to you. Fine, use that stuff on-prem. But if you don't have those needs, which frankly a lot of small businesses don't, maybe that's something you want to reconsider. I would even argue that you want to consider adopting a ecosystem. And by ecosystem, I mean Microsoft, I mean Google, I mean Apple, probably Microsoft or Google, right? But again, one of these ecosystems for your core collaboration storage. So think email, think messaging, think data storage, right? Those kinds of collaborative efforts. That should probably be the first software as a service you choose, and then build out from there. If you're a Google company, cool. Use Google, branch out from there. If you're Microsoft shop, again, choose Microsoft, choose 365, branch out from there. But I think we've got to probably start there and then find which specific line of business applications or SaaS applications enhance that collaborative space once we figure out what are the things that that space does not do for us. And I think that would probably be my answer. I think I would probably say, if the ecosystem, that core ecosystem does the thing I need it to do, then just do it. But if it doesn't do the thing I need, then what other SaaS platforms help me augment that piece so that I can go ahead and make sure that I'm efficient in that area? Now, in addition to that, what I'd probably start telling organizations is limit direct interaction with confidential information. So again, as an extension of moving to SaaS applications, we want to limit what's the data that the small business is directly supporting. I was working with a very large enterprise, a Fortune 500, and we were doing some insurance evaluations for cybersecurity insurance. And they had to maintain all kinds of social security numbers as a part of an application process they were doing. Long story short is we realized once the initial application was done, they didn't really use that social security number ever again. And so they put in a process to archive that data. And eventually they decided not to keep it at all beyond a very, very short window of time. And that literally on an annual basis saved them millions of dollars in cybersecurity insurance just by eliminating those social securities from the data they stored or processed. And that was a large enterprise. I would argue from a small business perspective, it's even more important than we do that. So again, if we don't store or process that sensitive information in our systems, it limits our responsibility to defend it. Now, just because I give it to a cloud provider doesn't mean I'm no longer responsible, or it doesn't absolve all my responsibilities, but it limits my responsibilities. It cuts the scope of what I have to do. Maybe I don't have to patch that system anymore. Maybe I don't have to configure that system anymore. Maybe I still have to do multi-factor authentication, but maybe I don't have to worry about these other things that have to take place behind the scenes. A good example is I don't have to be PCI compliant if I outsource my credit card processing to a third party. In other words, if that card number, that PIN, that information never hits my systems to be stored or processed, then I don't have that same responsibility that, say, a tier one provider or level one provider would have. So why take on these extra responsibilities? Why not partner with companies that are already doing that? So again, if we limit our direct interaction with confidential information, that by itself gives me an automatic outsourced partner to help partner with some of these cybersecurity responsibilities. Now, let's say that we've done that. Let's say that again, we're going to run out of time here, so I'll just kind of start to go quickly here. But as we start to have these conversations, let's say we've architected all this out. So we've said, okay, we have a partner, somebody's going to help us make these decisions. We've limited the data that we're going to defend. We're taking advantage of cloud systems, software as a service as much as we possibly can. But now we say, okay, but we still have an architecture that's left to maintain. What would that look like? And before we get into this, I'll just say, really quickly, some people might say to me, James, that all sounds great, but how realistic is it for organizations to get to that kind of cloud native space where you don't store and process a lot of data? That seems kind of Pollyannish almost. But I'll tell you, more and more companies that I'm dealing with are getting to this point. It's not that they're working towards that point; they are at that point. I did an assessment earlier, well, I should say maybe about a year ago, for a client that we work with every year, and they were about 2,500 nodes, and they had closed all their on-prem data centers. They had closed their infrastructure as a service. Their campus networks were literally just wireless networks. They had one big office space left where they gave wireless access to people when they came in the building. They're basically an ISP from that standpoint. And the majority of their staff worked remotely. And so, again, they were really just cloud native, and they weren't small. They were, again, about 2,500 nodes in the company as a whole. So again, there's a lot of those examples of companies that are out there, but I think you're going to see more and more embrace that. And if you haven't, I think it's something that you want to at least put on your radar as a part of a small business strategy for defending yourself. Now, the other thing that I would say is when you've architected all this and you sort of have that plan in place, the next thing I'd say is that you do want to have a plan for program management. Now, we could easily spend an hour just on program management, governance, compliance, and things like that. But what I wanted to do is give you some resources in this area. Over at Cybersecurity Risk Foundation, CRF, we're going to be releasing some documents in probably no later than April of 2025, detailing a GRC roadmap. And we want to be able to detail that both for large enterprises and smaller businesses. And you can see sort of a high level what that's going to look like here from a small business perspective. What we want to be able to do is give people checklists that they can follow to hopefully be more successful as they build their programs. So I won't read all these to you, but for example, if we go to step one, if you're going to start and initiate a cybersecurity program in your small business, I would say you need to get leadership sponsorship. In other words, the owner of the company, the owners of the company, the people who are at the highest level, do they agree this is something that needs to be done? Without that, why are you even bothering? From there, establish a program charter, or at least a quick definition of what your goals for this program are going to be. Even if it's not as formal as a charter, at least know what your goals are. And then define who's going to be responsible for enacting the goals that you've defined. Right? These are the kinds of things you're going to have to make sure that you put into place. I won't read through each of these that are here, but again, this is going to hopefully be a bit of an overview, sort of a roadmap for you that you can use to go ahead and put in good program management safeguards. At a high level, we would say you would initiate the program, you would do asset inventory to make sure you know what is it you're defending. You're going to select appropriate safeguards, so make sure you know what your target state looks like. You're going to educate the people in your organization as to what their responsibilities are, what they need to know to help support the goals of the organization. We need to then implement, do the things that we said we were going to do. We need to then validate those safeguards, make sure that we're doing the things that we said we were going to do, and then finally communicate the results of that validation to stakeholders so the business can make better decisions about the current state of things on a regular basis. But at a high level, that's what I would expect an organization, even a small business, to think about. This is sort of that pared down view of GRC and governance that we might be able to apply in the context of a small business. The other thing that I would do, of course, is I would want them to implement technical safeguards. And there's a lot of decent resources that are out there today as far as what are those good things that we can do as organizations to be successful at defending ourselves. Now, there's still a lot of confusion. I said this earlier, that often organizations are going to debate, what are the things that actually make a difference that enable us to defend ourselves. But the nice thing is I think there are some really good resources that are out there. We could definitely, give you links to, maybe a dozen or more really good groups. A lot of this is coming from national intelligence agencies. The US National Security Agency, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA in the US. We have groups like GCHQ, who's putting out some guidance. The Australians are, the Canadians are. Like, there's a lot of these groups that are putting out that research. A couple of the guides that I would maybe have you look at right away, the Cybersecurity Risk Foundation, or CRF, has their small business cybersecurity plan. So that might be one thing I would look at. So again, these are all things you can look at. I'll give you links to these at the very end of the presentation, so that way you can go ahead and look these URLs up if you want to. We have the Australian Cybersecurity Center. They have something called their Essential 8, if you haven't heard of that project. Really good research project as far as looking at what are the technical safeguards that the Australian intelligence agencies have identified really as effective in stopping incidents from being realized. Most of them are preventive controls. However, they do have backups in there as well. So again, mostly preventive, but not always. And then, of course, in the US, CISA has their cyber hygiene services. Definitely some good education there and good resources for you if you haven't checked out some of their resources. One of those that I'll call it specifically, near and dear to my heart, is the CRF Small Business Cybersecurity Plan. This is a free download for you. Go to crfsecure.org. You can go ahead and grab a copy of it. But the point of the Small Business Cybersecurity Plan was we had developed all these resources for larger enterprises, a governance and risk model, a threat taxonomy, an audit framework, right? All these different things. But the context always came up, well, what about smaller businesses, right? How do they handle these issues we're talking about? And the purpose of this plan was we wanted to be able to give smaller organizations a light set of safeguards that they could implement that we felt like would give them a decent chance at defending themselves. And we wrote it in such a way that it could be copied and pasted. And frankly, this could be almost like a light book of security policies for you. So again, free download, go grab a copy. But the point of it was to be able to say, these are the things that we would write into a small business security plan if we were putting something like this together. And it really is something we hope you copy and paste and use internally in your organizations so that you can have some sort of strategy or plan for being able to do this. Again, hopefully takes away some of the confusion or uncertainty. It's a subset of the CRF safeguards, but it doesn't include all of them. It's just those things that would be applicable more in the context of a small business. Now, there's a lot of things that you could do, and this is what we talked about earlier, right? That there's a lot of safeguards you could choose to implement. However, I guess I want to be super specific with you and say, okay, well, what are the things that you should do? And if I'm looking at a small business, if I'm looking at that small business cybersecurity plan, these would be the core systems that I think I would put in place. And I'm going to be specific. Who knows? I might get in trouble for being too specific in this, but let me give you my advice and what I would do if you were my neighbor and you were asking me for feedback on this. And I won't read all these to you. You would expect me to do data backups. You'd expect endpoint detection and response. You'd expect perimeter firewalls, patch management. But these specifically are the things that I would expect a small business to do if I was giving them feedback on what they could do to defend themselves. And in fact, if I want to get super specific, I mean, and I spent some time on this, really sort of debating what I thought I would do. And I went through all the hygiene guides, like for the Australians, Essential 8, which is kind of probably one of my favorites. Looked at some of the things that CISA had come up with, what we did at Center for Internet Security and CIS controls and at CRF. And really, if you said, okay, James, give me a specific list, this would be my list. And what I would do is I'd start with number one on that list. And if I had number one, I'd say check, and I'd move on and go to number two. And if I didn't have number two in place, then I would focus on that until number two is done. And then I would go to number three and so on and so on. I would start with endpoint detection and response. EDR is just too ubiquitous. It's too easy. Just get it done. If you don't have EDR everywhere, goodness gracious, just get it done. And I think this is something we've all accepted for a long time. Small businesses even know this is important. So I don't think this is a hard sell. But unless you've got a really good reason to have an exception, make sure everybody's got EDR in the organization. Secondly, patch things. Start with applications, but also get your OSs too. More often than not, exploits are going to take advantage of applications more so than OSs these days. Don't get me wrong, OS patching is still important, but there's more and more research showing that application patching is going to be more important. So think third-party applications, your PDF readers, your browsers, etc. Keep those things up to date. Exploits definitely take advantage of that stuff. Thirdly, I would use multi-factor. Make sure MFA is in place. So put MFA in place everywhere. All your SaaS applications especially. Any remote access you might have in place. Any administrative rights you might have. And ideally, everywhere you have a place where you would authenticate, ideally you would put MFA in place to support that. Fourth, I would limit end user administrative privileges. Whether that's, I'd probably start with local admin rights. So again, think local admin capabilities, limit that first. And then secondly, in any of your applications, and yes, that includes SaaS applications like we talked before. I've always debated this application control thing though. If you were to say, James, if you could only do one thing to defend yourself, what would it be? My answer has always been application control. I love application control. There's so many good reasons to do application control. My challenge is it's not always easy for small businesses to be able to do that on their own. And oftentimes you might need a partner to help you, like one of these MSPs or somebody to help you do that. I'm not saying you couldn't do it on your own. It's just, I think you're going to run into challenges, especially if you don't have dedicated professionals on staff. So as much as I want to put that as number one, I put it a little bit lower on my list only because I think you might need some help. And I think you can probably do those first 3 or 4 on your own as a small business owner or as a small tech team. Number 5 might take a little bit extra resources though. So I still believe it's probably one of the most effective things we can do to defend ourselves, but I put it a little bit lower on the list just because of the importance of those other things and your ability to do those on your own. And then finally, I'd say automated backups. And with those automated backups, the thing that I would say is include your cloud data as well. So don't just back up your laptops, but if you back up your data to OneDrive, back up your OneDrive data somewhere else. And maybe consider having tiers of backups, some of which are cloud oriented, some of which are going to be something on-prem. Also consider immutable storage. If you haven't looked into some of the solutions out there for immutable backups, make that part of your list as well. But make sure that that data is protected for those backups that are in place. This is where I'll probably get in trouble. I'm not going to read this list to you. I tried to think about some of the companies that I've seen that have done this. You probably have favorites. And if you have some that I'm missing, please, goodness gracious, put them in notes and send them to Sans or send them to me or send them to your friends and family. But I wanted to at least give you some tools. And so who are some examples of vendors that are friendly to small businesses? Goodness gracious, there are so many more vendors than I have time to put on one slide, but I at least wanted to give you some names of companies to say, you know what, if you've got to start somewhere and you want to start doing your research, please do your own research, look into it. There's a lot of good vendors that are out there, and I probably missed 5 of your favorites, and I apologize up front, I really do. I just wanted to give you some of the big names that I hear over and over again as I'm working with clients. So again, for each of these, I tried to give you some examples. Again, and I'm mentioning those remote monitoring and management tools, right? So the RMM solutions. So again, that may or may not be something you do on your own. It's not to say you couldn't. You certainly, as a small business, absolutely could get your own license to an RMM solution. But again, that might be something where you go to an MSP and take advantage of their licensing as well. That might be another way you can go ahead and handle that. Then what I would argue is on a regular basis, what you're going to need to do is you're going to want to regularly evaluate the status of each of these safeguards. And this is, I think, sometimes the issue that small business owners have is you ask a cybersecurity professional, or if you put yourself in the mindset of a small business owner is almost always going to think, okay, if I go to my cybersecurity people and I ask them, what do we need to do? The answer is always going to be more. And I feel like that's the fear that they always have, is that cybersecurity and technology is this unending pit where we just keep throwing money into this hole and we never know if there's going to be enough there. So I think by doing regular assessments against a benchmark, let's say, or against a list of safeguards that are appropriate, I think what we have the benefit of doing then is, as a business owner, we can make better decisions. Because if I can see the scope of what I need to be focused on, and you can show me we're doing really good at these things, but not good at those things, I can see the big picture. I can use that data to make better decisions. But the problem we run into a lot of times is we don't know how to show that to business owners. So what we want to be able to do is come up with what are those set of safeguards that we believe in our organization that we're appropriate. What are those things we believe we should be doing? Then what we want to be able to do is take those assessments, validate that the safeguards that we expect to be there are actually there. And if they're not, just be honest with ourselves. But then take the results of that information, share it with business stakeholders, again, so that they can make better decisions about this. Again, if you've read any of the Douglas Hubbard writings or any of that on risk management, he's got a great quote in his first book that says, "We measure things to make better decisions." And I couldn't agree with that more. That's why we're going to do some of this validation. Now, if I'm doing this as a small business owner, maybe what I do to get started is maybe I do a self-assessment, right? Maybe I download one of these Excel tools and answer these questions for myself. Maybe I work with my cybersecurity partner. Maybe I work with my MSP to do this. And I would say at least on an annual basis, I would want to get a current snapshot of where are we. And ask somebody to do it. Maybe again, you have an MSP in place and say, hey, listen, do this for me. Like fill out this form for me. Let me know where we are so that I have something to measure against and I can see the progress and see where we need to improve our processes. But I think on a regular basis, you want to be able to have this kind of evaluation. So you have your professional do the evaluation, show you your strengths and weaknesses. Think of it like a checkup at the doctor, right? Think about getting like blood work done and getting lab results. It's going to show you where are you doing well and where could you improve. And then you can give that data to the business owner so they can see that, see where they're doing well, see where they're struggling, and then make decisions about where to make future investments. Now, one of the tools that we're going to give you, and I'll give you again just another free download that you can use to do this, because again, I don't want this to be sort of an unknown thing or something you have to create from scratch. Over at CRF, so again, crfsecure.org, we have a small business assessment tool. So if you go to if you just go to the website, under research, you'll see that there's a link there for the small business cybersecurity plan. If you go to that page, you're going to see that we have that cybersecurity plan there for you. And then we also have the assessment tool that you can download as well. And what we did was we took a list of the questions from the CRF safeguards and we pared it down and said, okay, at a bare minimum, what are the areas of defense of questions that someone at a small business would want to answer? They'll want to know the status of where they are. And you can see sort of on the left side, we have that table. You can see the different topic areas, the different domains that we cover. You can see that basically as you go through questions, I don't have a screenshot here of the Q&A process, but many of you know that we've been giving away Excel tools like this for years. And basically you just click a drop-down menu, you answer the question, and then as you answer all the questions in the tool, then what it's going to do is it's going to give you that 5-point rating. And then the very bottom, that overall rating, that's sort of an aggregate score that you could use to gauge where you're at. And then, of course, the graph just represents those numbers there. And you might say, okay, well, James, where should we be? I mean, honestly, this is sort of a slimmed down version of safeguards. I mean, I would say you're shooting for a 5, right? This isn't something you're doing to say, well, I want to get to a 3 and call it a day. You really are probably shooting for a 5 on this, right? This is the kind of thing you'd hope you'd get there one day, but little by little, work towards that. You think, okay, well, James, isn't 5 perfection and gold standard and such? No. This is just a slimmed down set of safeguards. So if you get a 5, then what you could do is you could look forward and say, okay, well, are there other good things I could do? And there will be. There'll be a lot of other good things that you can do. This is just a set of those that you could consider as a part of that process. Let me answer a couple questions that have come in, and then I'll give you some closing thoughts here, some things to think about. Let's see under Q&A process, some questions have come in. So if you have other questions you want to ask, feel free to add those in there. I'll try to address a couple of these though before we give some concluding thoughts. So the program management safeguards, is there a tool that aligns to that? We don't have a tool or a white paper released on those 7 items yet. That's actually sort of a pre-release of a GRC roadmap that we're going to be putting out here and publishing. Like I said, probably March or April of 2025. We do annual releases at CRF of all of our resources. And so we're going to be releasing that roadmap as a part of the CRF's governance and risk model and the update that we're doing. The content's pretty well locked down right now, but like I said, we're going to release it all at once come spring. So that is going to be coming out here in the very near future. So keep your eyes open for that for sure. I'm sure we'll do webcasts and different resources on that once we do, though. Funny enough, though, on the inventory side, if you go back to my slide there on some of the tooling that's out there, there's actually some really, really affordable tooling that's out there nowadays that small businesses can use for inventory. And again, when I'm thinking inventory, I'm thinking primarily anytime you have to store or process information. Now, the challenge is most inventory tools are based on compute platforms. So laptops, workstation servers, whatever. You may have to track your SaaS applications separate. For small businesses, just be prepared for that. But if you can do that, especially those RMM solutions, they're getting better and better at doing inventory for that purpose. I don't mind sharing what we do. We use a tool called Splashtop that enables that. And I think we want to spend, again, we're a small organization, less than $50 a month maybe to do all the things that they give us. So I don't know. I think that idea of being able to do inventory is getting actually more and more affordable. So look into the options there. I think there's a lot of good things out there that you could do. Would I change the order of my safeguards for larger businesses? Probably. I think the thing I would probably do in a larger business is I would probably move application control up the list. If you've got dedicated cybersecurity professionals, I'm going to put application control definitely higher. I might still do EDR first just because it's so ubiquitous, but it's probably going to be application control very quickly after that, just as a follow-up. All right. Also, a lot of small businesses rely on third-party cloud service providers for systems. How should they ensure that third parties are secure? We don't have third-party risk management in this as part of my list here. You're right, I don't. I'll admit that we could have a whole long conversation about third-party risk management. In fact, if you look at some of the SANS courseware that we put out here recently, and the LDR 419 and 519 class, both of them have entire sections dedicated to third-party risk management because it is such a popular topic these days. I'll be honest, if I'm a small business, if I haven't done like everything in that list that I showed you, I'm not even thinking about third-party risk management. There are so many other higher priority things I would have people do. I'm not against third-party risk management. That's not my problem. My concern is that when my resources are so limited, like what you see, and I have to prioritize, I'll be honest, third-party risk management is probably not going to be high on my list if I have to do that. Oh, and what I mean by application control, just to be specific, application control specifically, we used to call it whitelisting. These have been tools like Bit9 Parity or Carbon Black or Threat Locker or Windows Defender Application Control, right? Any of these kinds of products. The idea being that you establish a list of binaries and libraries that are allowed to execute or be referenced, and that's all that you're allowed to execute. So if you're only allowed to execute 30 programs, then that's what your computer can do. And if somebody wants to add a 31st program to that list, then somebody needs to investigate it and authorize it before we allow it to execute. So look into some of those products. Like I said, Threat Locker is sort of a good recent tool that's out there. Windows Defender Application Control, right? These are all tools that you see a lot of people using today. But yeah, we used to call that whitelisting, but application control is sort of the new name that we give a lot of that today. All right. Well, with that being said, I know we only got a couple minutes left here. The thing I guess I would probably close with is say, just remember, cybersecurity is not going to happen by accident. And that includes with small businesses. And if you, as a small business, don't achieve your cybersecurity goals, your mission likely will suffer. And you're not going to achieve your cybersecurity goals by ignoring strategies for technology and cybersecurity. Someone's going to have to help you establish that and make sure that that's in place. But the flip side of that conversation is unlike what the movies say, hackers are not all powerful. They are not omnipotent. They can't do whatever they want whenever they want. If we do even these basic things that we're talking about here, there's a good chance you will be successful. We know what works. Cybersecurity has been around a good 30 years now. We have a very strong idea of what actually works to defend you. But some of those things aren't convenient, and some of those things are hard, and you might need to get some help on it as a small business. But if we do those things, I do think you can be successful. And I'll argue, like with any other part of life, if you have a disciplined focus on the strategies, the things that we know work, even those small ones, you will be able to achieve your goals. And so I really do honestly believe that. I believe that if we're disciplined about this, if we stay the course, if we know what works, if we do those things and we're diligent, we'll be able to achieve the results that we hope are going to happen. The last thing I'll just share with you too, if you are looking for further resources, I know in a situation like this, again, an hour goes by fast. There's only so much time to go through some of these things. Give you a couple of websites to look at. If you're looking for some free resources, check out the CRF, check out CISA and their cyber hygiene services, CISA.gov. Check out the Australian Cybersecurity Center. I think all of these are really good resources that you can get for small businesses to help you in those efforts. Also, I'd say connect with me. I'm happy, again, LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me. Again, you can see my name there and such on LinkedIn. Although I will say for any of you that are going to try to connect with me today, apparently I made too many changes to my LinkedIn account here this week. And so they've temporarily locked my account. So hopefully by the end of this week, they'll have me unlocked again. So if you don't see me today, feel free to try again in a couple days, maybe make yourself a calendar reminder, but connect with me and I'm happy to interact with you, you all kind of on that platform. It's a good way I found for us to share ideas. And also at SANS, I know we've been excited over the last year and a half. We've got 2 new courses that sort of cover a lot of this information in more depth for both smaller and larger organizations. The LDR 419 class, the Performing a Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, and the new 5-day LDR 519 class, Cybersecurity Risk Management and Compliance. We're excited about both of those classes. These have all been sort of multiple years in the works, getting these out there for you. So hopefully those are things that, maybe expand on some of the things we talked about today and give you some even more feedback. So as always, appreciate you being here. We've got a lot of good other webcasts coming up here in the SANS Cybersecurity Leadership Curriculum. Keep an eye out on the newsletters and on the website there. Again, there's a lot of really good free resources coming out in 2025 and hope you get to take advantage of them. So again, thanks for being here today. Appreciate you being a part of the webcast. Look forward to seeing you on future SANS webcasts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James, for your presentation and for helping to bring content like this to the SANS community. To our audience today, thank you so much for joining us. For a schedule of all upcoming and archives SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. You can find your CPEs for all completed webcasts by logging into your SANS portal account, navigating to your account dashboard, then clicking My Webcasts. You can then download your CPE on the right-hand side of the page. Until next time, take care, and we hope to see you again soon.